Amazon announced it will be investing additional $2.75 billion into AI startup Anthropic. The company also announced
San Francisco-based firm was co-founded by former executives at Microsoft, backed rival OpenAI, and siblings Dario and Daniela Amode.
Anthropic is aiming to build transformative general AI systems that are safe, reliable, steerable.
On this episode of the Western AI podcast, Owen speaks to Garvan Doyle, Y Combinator founder and engineer at Anthropic, a startup making waves with its ethics-infused Claude LLMs, and recent multi-billion-dollar investment from Amazon. Get ready to hear about the hidden job market in AI and why titles like sales engineer might be more interesting than you think. Garvan's take on the future of prompt engineering and whether it's a fad, and how you can impress Anthropic hiring managers with a 40-second video. Enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you, Garvan, for joining us on the first podcast of the year on the Western AI podcast. Maybe to get started, we could just dive into kind of your career journey, the roadmap that got you to Anthropic, from high school to founding Mixr, working at Assembly AI, to where you are now.
Totally, yeah. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Big fan of Western AI, and super excited to jump into this. I think starting off, in high school, I kind of always anticipated doing something technical. I had a natural affinity for programming and coding, but not necessarily in the academic sense. But I liked sort of messing around with things. I feel like a good proxy for this is like, when did you make your first Minecraft server? That's like a reasonable proxy for how you feel about it. But I spent the majority of grade 11 and grade 12 most excited about sort of my computer science classes, building websites, building sort of apps for Android and iOS. And I think towards the tail end of grade 12, realized I wanted to study software engineering, computer science. I actually originally thought I was going to be an architect, but pretty quickly found out that you need some artistic flair, and I just don't have anything in that department. So the backup was computer engineering or software engineering. So after high school, I started software engineering in Western. You start sort of your general year, and then you make your recommendations on which stream you'll follow. I definitely found that first year computer science there really affirmed my interest. I was fascinated with building things. I think software is a really interesting sort of skill to have, because if you want to build a house or build a physical product, there's just like a lot of logistics and other things you might need. But with software, you kind of can sit down and just crank something out on a keyboard, and it ends up being something people can use. So I found a lot of interest and affinity to that overall. In my first year at Western, I focused on a couple things. I think I found the engineering design projects most interesting. Wasn't a huge fan of like algorithms or any of the sort of academic side of software, but really liked when you went on a sprint to build something tangible. I think a couple areas that were really interesting to me was starting to apply software to some robotic stuff. So in engineering, you do a design project. Our design project was something as simple as, I think, sorting marbles based on the color. But I got to write some code that then actually implemented into a motor and did some work. So I think that really continued the trend of, I'm interested in building and making things that I can use or other people can use, and software is a great vehicle for doing that. I'm curious, where specifically would be of interest. I'm happy to talk about clubs. I'm happy to talk about school, but without sort of just tangentially running off on the entirety of Western. It was an amazing 4 to 5 years there, so I want to make sure I structure it correctly.
Yeah, I'm just curious, for the first year engineering student, computer science student, I think just having kind of a lens into the projects you worked on. I think oftentimes applications just say, just apply. But I think kind of knowing what that process looks like from A to Z, the skill set, and kind of how you went from a high school kid, didn't know much about programming, just kind of doing projects on the side, to working at Anthropic in San Francisco. It's such a huge journey. And I think having some kind of transparency into what led you there would be awesome.
Totally. Yeah. So I'd say outside of the day to day of school, I think is the most important part to focus on. If you're willing to do computer science or software engineering, there's obviously a large portion of exams and studying that you just sort of have to get through. I don't think that was my favorite part of it at all. So I'll just sort of put that in a bucket and say, that was an important thing to get through. But the most important part I found was the extracurriculars. As I mentioned, like building things was really important. In my first year, I found a really interesting sort of side project that I wanted to invest in. I think my intuition for this was that I saw lots of people a couple years above me with really cool jobs at like Google or like these big tech companies that I wanted to work at had really interesting like either personal websites or GitHub repositories. So I started thinking, how can I build something? And the first thing I tried was there's a Twitter account that tweets out the number of people at the rec center in Western. So every hour, it's like this many people in the weight room, this many people in the cardio area, so on and so forth. And I found someone a couple years older. I think they were a TA at this point, but then in their third or fourth year had written a small machine learning model, like really basic linear regression, logistic regression, that predicted, the next hour. So it took all the data and was like, hey, what does the next hour look like based on the past, 2 years of data this Twitter account had? I thought that was really cool. I want to try to take that a step further. And again, like my core focus is applying problems to my life and things that have like tangible solutions that aren't just doing something for the sake of doing something. So what that looked like was taking additional data. So I took in weather data, I took in exam schedules, a couple other like, I can't quite remember, but like one or two other data points that I incorporated alongside this logistic regression to provide like a more nuanced prediction, right? So, every Tuesday at 3 p.m., the gym is packed. But if that Tuesday turns out it's like, crazy snow or like huge rain, it's going to be less packed. So that was like my first side project. I don't think it really has to be that sophisticated, but I think the most important part is doing the actual engineering part or building part and then putting something out in the world. And what I found that was like a pretty key part of that was writing my findings up. So like this model I made was a local model that ran on my computer that no one else could use. But I wrote a little article about it and like how I used it and how I built it. And that was really helpful because, that next summer when I was applying for jobs and stuff, the model is something that no one's going to actually really look at or use, but someone will read the article about your experience. So I think it's like, if you're trying to be tactical about how do I demonstrate that I have a passion for this or I have skills in this section, it's finding a way to preserve the work you did and demonstrate that to a future, like whoever it might be. It might be an employer, it might be like an organization you want to join. In any capacity, you want to sort of preserve the work you're going to do and build something that you find useful. Like I found the tool quite useful. Me and my housemates would choose to go to the gym based on its prediction. And it was laughably wrong most of the time, but it still in merit was somewhat successful. So I think that was like a first place I started like building. I worked on a couple clubs at Western. I was on the rocketry team, the engineering team for building sort of model rockets. We worked for sort of 3 years to build out this large rocket and launch it at the there's an international rocketry show down in New Mexico. I actually, by the time I graduated, we still hadn't got to the point where we had like a functional rocket. You need a bunch of like licensing and tests and stuff. And my main focus was on the telemetry aspect. So as rocket goes up, it needs to communicate how fast it's moving, all these different things. That was my first time sort of working with Arduinos and microchips and on all these kind of things. So again, as I mentioned around the first engineering project I did that was outside of like a computer, it was like software and something physical. This was like a bigger version of that. And it was also a really good opportunity to collaborate with other engineers that weren't software engineers. I think that's like a thing that you should focus on doing early on in your time in school. It's like, how do I find opportunities where I need to work with people who have different skill sets to me? You're going to work with people with the same skill set as you in your work stream, in school, in your projects, but extracurriculars are a really good source for connecting with people of multidisciplinary skill sets that, it really takes a new level of thinking and planning to work in these different ways because you all know different things. and it's not necessarily the most easy thing to do. So I think that's a great thing to think about. But yeah, like besides those sort of two core things, I think I focused on meeting many people in school. I found that to be really important. Like now that I'm 3 or 4 years out of school, I found that the connections you make and just the friends you make in those few years become really important later on.
Mhm.
Just to chat with someone to get some advice about something or to get an insight about an industry, you really can't overvalue that enough. It's really important, and it's something that maybe doesn't seem tangible in your first few years at school. It's not necessarily something that you leverage getting an internship with or a new grad job because everyone's in the same boat. But the few years outside of school is where that really starts paying dividends. So they were sort of the three or four core things I focused on. And then, the main thing I did sort of after or in my last year of school was this startup that we called Mixr. This story is one I've told a bunch of times, but it's a fun one and something that's quite sentimental to me. It was right around COVID. So, COVID landed, I believe, in March of 2020. This was sort of April of 2020, May of 2020. There is a biannual engineering bar trip, which is Eng Goes to Seeps. I'm a big fan of it. Most engineers are big fans of it. But we couldn't go because it was unsafe to do so during COVID-19. And a couple people had tried to do a similar social night on Zoom, and it ended up being a very similar dynamic to a lecture. You have the loudest person, the loudest friend telling terrible jokes or just being loud and annoying, and everyone just listening. And it's just not the same dynamic as hanging out. So myself and my roommate decided that we could probably build something that more closely mirrored a bar night or a house party. And we really wanted to build something that our friends would use. And again, this comes back to the building something for a purpose. It wasn't oh, this is a cool side project. It was this is something that me and 10 friends can use, me and 20 friends can use, and we'll actually enjoy it. And it's going to make this weird time of COVID a little bit better. So we built a video chatting web app, really scrappily, just sort of hacked it together and managed to get sort of 50 to 60 of the sort of engineering group in this platform. And the premise of the platform was it was rooms of 8 seats. So it's a house party. There's, many rooms and there's only 8 seats in each room. And you can play games, you can listen to music, and you can sort of chat amongst these rooms. But then every 15 to 20 minutes, the rooms will shuffle, mix up, and you meet new people. So that's the mix of Mixr. And it broke hilariously. It was very unstable. Half my friends got locked out of it, couldn't get back in. A bunch of people's webcams didn't work. But for some portion of the group, it was a really fun experience compared to that of Zoom. And, it wasn't anything like going to the bar, but it was something. And we got really good feedback. And I think that was my first experience of sort of what they say in startup world of talking to users. There's a really exciting feeling when you've built something, someone else understands it and enjoys it, and then gives you some insightful feedback. I really liked one of the things from feedback that we got that was really salient to me was someone said, I really like the seats. It's really cool. It feels really natural. It would be super cool if when, Garvan clicks the top left seat, he's in the top left seat for everyone. And this wasn't something we thought about, but this person said when they're chatting in Mixr, they were actually looking in the top left, and everyone would look in the top left, and then everyone would look in the top right if someone else started talking. So it was that sort of feedback loop with users that got me really excited about building, because you felt like people kind of cared about what you were doing. It wasn't just doing it for yourself. So we spent most our summer on that. I had I quit myself and my co-founder Blaze, who I started it with. We both quit our summer internships to focus on it, and it was growing quite a lot, just given the fact that there wasn't many video chats for fun online at that time. And we managed to sort of help support Western's O Week and a bunch of other universities' orientation weeks by building a sort of new version of Mixr that was geared towards live events. So the same mixing and jumping around a house, but you could live stream a concert, or you could, control the rooms with an admin panel. So that was my first experience, working with not an end user in a B2C context of like, you're building an app that many, many people will use, but you're selling to a corporation that has specific constraints. So I think a lot of the skills I use today in my job came from those early conversations when you would talk to, a faculty member at Western that says, we need the ability to sort of see a list of all the names of where the students are at a given time, and being able to take that requirement and translate that to something technical. That's like a core part of my job today. So I feel like finding scenarios where you can put yourself in, micro experiments of what your job might look like in the future are really helpful, because you gain an intuition pretty early. So Mixr was a really cool experience. After working with the schools for orientation week, we got into a program in San Francisco called Y Combinator. It's a accelerator. They invest in your company. They kind of mentor you. We ended up taking the product and sort of pivoting a couple times. We tried to solve for the boringness of remote work. We didn't really solve that, but we learned a lot along the way, and then sort of eventually decided to fold the company once COVID had ended and the need for online socialization had dropped. And that's really when I found myself like, I was done school. I'd graduated throughout that period. And I was like, I guess I need a real job now. I can't just like keep building this weird startup. What should I do? And I think that's where a lot of people find themselves in their third, fourth, and even just the year after they graduate. It's like I've spent a lot of time focusing on exams, focusing on some clubs, and now I don't know what I want to do. I think the most important thing is to lean into like where you have some passion. And I think this is quite a hard thing to do because like what you're passionate about might not directly translate to a job that's, sort of facilitated for new grads. It might be a job that you can do later on in your career, but there's a certain, scope to what new grads are sort of able to do, or at least like privy to. I think it's important to not only map out what's important to you, but also map out like what is out there, what is available. I think I spent a lot of time looking at product roles. I thought like, I really like building. I think like maybe I want to be a product manager. I liked coding. So I was like, maybe I want to be a software engineer. There was a multitude of things I applied to and looked at, but I think I came across AWS had a role called a solutions architect for sort of their cloud platform. And that always interested me because I felt like, that person was, again, like I said, in high school, I wanted to be an architect. So I guess it all comes full circle, but I want to be able to like build things and help build systems. And when I talk to people who are in engineering, I found that at the most successful engineering organizations in the world, you end up doing quite a small part of the overall problem, and you do it really, really well. And that makes the whole system work, but you don't get to have sort of that overarching view of the product end to end. And when I talked to some product managers, I didn't realize how much documentation and writing was a part of that. And I didn't really love that. I wanted to like build and write code, but they were really more, managing a process and deadlines and coordinating in a sort of like multi-skilled way. So I found that software engineering wasn't quite right. Product engineering wasn't quite right. But this solutions architect thing seemed somewhat interesting. And a big part of it that resonated with me was the fact that you would talk to people outside of your organization. So with Mixr, we spent a lot of time selling the product. We would, send out a bunch of cold emails. Someone would say, hey, I'll chat for 30 minutes. And then we would try sell them this product either for virtual events or, for their for their sort of remote workforce. But between that experience, I think I really realized that it's important to identify what energizes you. And I am energized by conversations with people who have different problems, the problems I have. So product engineers or product managers work a lot internally. Software engineers work a lot internally. But solutions architects work with external customers, using internal tech. So it's like that cool blend between engineering and sales where you're doing both things. One thing I did realize though from my startup days was that I actually didn't want to work at a massive company. I had a lot of experience, buying products from Amazon for Mixr, and it was just an enormous company. And the people I spoke to there sort of didn't have a sense of core purpose or ownership over the mission of what that company was trying to do, because once you hit thousands of employees, it's just very difficult to sort of maintain that. So I knew I wanted to go to some sort of startup, and through Y Combinator was able to look at all the ones that didn't fold like mine did and sort of see some more successful startups. And I came across a role on an internal posting that read, I think it was customer facing full stack developer. And I was like, that's a weird title. I'm really curious. And I reached out to the founder, chatted with them, and basically they were building, or they had an API for converting audio recordings to text. And they said, we're trying to find ways to help our customers build products. And the main difference between, the product they're selling and like maybe the product Notion or Asana or any of these like really large software companies you may have heard of are selling is that a Notion salesperson is selling to someone who the end user is going to likely be non-technical or likely not be an engineer. Whereas when you're selling an API, you're actually selling part of a foundational tech stack. So you're selling to engineers, and that means your sales team needs to be very engineering oriented, or ideally be engineers themselves. So that was an interesting niche I found, because it was not a saturated market in terms of the job market, because there's not many people who are both engineering and sort of sales oriented. And I think, again, coming back to some of the experience in university, meeting and working with folks of different skill sets really facilitated the ability to have those types of communication skills that you need to be successful in sales. Like, you need to be able to talk to an engineering manager about why the product will work for them, and you need to be able to talk to their business counterpart on why that will be beneficial for the business. And balancing those two things is really important. And I think there's a lot of very interesting jobs at the intersection of tech and business that aren't very well advertised to new grads, is probably like my main takeaway. So happy to keep sort of jumping into the assembly and Anthropic journey, but I'm curious, like, that'll elicit any questions or any thoughts so far.
Like that specific zone is something I kind of want to double click on, like things like sales engineering, solution architecture. Like, what are some other jobs kind of on that intersection of business and technology, specifically relating to AI, that people might not be aware of?
Totally. Yeah. I think, there's the canonical example for this in AI is the rise of the prompt engineer. I think people have found this very interesting. And essentially, most pieces of core technology that you use to build a product require you to code. And LLMs are the first that have not necessarily made that a hard requirement. Like, once you have integrated an LLM, you can change the way it reacts to data and the tasks it does using natural language. You don't actually need to write code. And that has had a very interesting outcome, because what I notice with lots of customers who are deploying generative AI at scale is that they have this new role between, an engineer and a product manager is this sort of prompt expert or prompt engineer. It's someone who is spending a lot of time becoming an expert in leveraging an LLM to do something. And previously, that might have been an engineer or a software engineer, but what I'm finding is more often than not, it's someone with subject matter expertise in a specific field. So you have this scenario. Let's say, you are trying to generate something to do with the tax code. You're trying to summarize someone's tax refund, or you're trying to, better explain how taxation works for an individual. The prompt you need to write for that requires you to understand the tax code. And the engineer who might be able to write that prompt doesn't have any background in tax. So there's this like new sort of shifted version of a role that takes someone with experience in some business domain or some operational domain and adds on the additional experience or skill of using a language model, be that through, just using ChatGPT or Claude.ai a lot, or actually interfacing directly with an LLM via an API. But I've noticed that to be quite interesting. So it's like over time, I think technology, the barrier to entry for technology is going to get lower and lower. And it's going to necessitate that the practitioners of technology, the software engineers, the product engineers, need to be more like contextually aware of the business problems. And that's why I think like sort of focusing on balancing your skill set there is super important.
On that point of prompt engineering and whatnot, do you think that the market's going to shift towards where prompt engineering is less important because the model gets so good? Or do you think there's going to be kind of a logarithmic curve where kind of the growth of the models as like data constraints come to play, they stop accelerating at the same rate? And it's more so about maximizing the models that we have now.
I think you're going to see a couple things. I think it's a really, really good question with some nuance. Over time, you're going to see the sort of trickery that goes into prompting minimize. Like you're going to see things like I sometimes see in prompts that people say, "Oh, I'll tip you $25 if you do this," or they repeat the instructions multiple times. I think a lot of those things are going to minimize over time. That's due to like post-training techniques that make instruction following a little bit better. You can see that with some of our more recent models. Sonnet 3.5 is really, really capable at following instructions. And what that has meant is that people who had or organizations that had prompts that were like very verbose and very specified for a task, they've been able to reduce a lot of the fluff that's in there and sort of just concisely articulate what they want the model to do, and it goes and does it. Where I'm going to see, or where I believe we'll see the sort of new presence of this like prompt engineering style person will be in the orchestration of these technologies. So one thing that's very interesting is it's quite hard to measure reliably how good a model is for your given task. A lot of this still comes down to feel and tactility of the model. An example of this is, we have really, really good models for writing code, but there's models that are equivalent at writing code, but based on human preference data, do much better at like writing prose or writing, like output letters or emails. And there's no real way to measure that. You can measure its code writing ability on like standardized evaluations on, given this problem, did it write code that worked? But given the scenario of, here is a situation, like here is a customer's email to you, respond to the customer. How good or bad that is very subjective. And we're finding that there's like a flavor or taste to LLMs. And I think that's going to become really important. You might see the role over time potentially dissolve into the, adjacent surrounding roles of like product manager, product engineer, software engineer. But frankly, I do think over time, there is still going to be this necessity for someone who has deep expertise in the characteristics of AI. How does the model work? They learn this by experientially playing with the model. And then they have deep, deep expertise in some subject matter that's like unrelated to the model. I think that's going to continue to be a trend. How that will actually manifest, likely you're going to see model improvements to continue. I'm not very worried about data saturation. I think there's a lot more data out there than I think conservative estimates have sort of accounted for. I also think that you're starting to see optimizations outside of the model layer. An example of this is we recently announced a feature called prompt caching, which allows you to, if I have some large document, let's say like a big PDF, and I ask a question of this PDF, if I want to ask a follow-up question, I'm only going to pay and compute the tokens in the follow-up question, not for the entire PDF. And what this allows you to do is effectively leverage slower but smarter models at the same latency and cost profile as you would a smaller model. And the benefits are that is now that there's a class of use cases that if you want to use an expensive model, the use case is no longer satisfied. Like it's only a successful deployment of that use case with certain unit economics. And by now leveraging a larger model at the price of a smaller one, you're able to get much better performance in this category. So I think you're going to see intelligence get cheaper and get smarter over time. And that's going to be done through innovations outside of the model layer, like how the model is hosted, ways in which we can quantize it, sort of different external innovations to the actual like model and research development pipeline.
Interesting. I'd definitely love to talk more about the model later on, but I think to kind of switch paths a little bit, talk about like your day-to-day work at Anthropic, what kind of your job consists of.
Totally, yeah. So I joined Anthropic in January of this year. I joined as the first solutions architect. Again, this role is the canonical role for someone with an engineering background talking to customers. But we've since sort of changed the nature and name of the team to be the Applied AI team. Our goal is to help customers apply LLMs and other AI and general like ML techniques to business problems to generate business outcomes. So I joined in January as the first person on this team. The team is now sort of 12-ish folks. I oversee all 12 of us. We work with startups, with Fortune 100s, with the government, the full spectrum of the market. We integrate and sort of help these customers and organizations deploy use cases with Claude. The main role of someone on the Applied AI team is to essentially be an advisor on all things AI. I think if you juxtapose it to something like a solutions architect at a cloud company, they are broad experts in a series of foundational technologies that you can use to build a product. Someone on the Applied AI team at Anthropic is a much more narrow expert in the implementation and use cases of language models and generative AI. So one of the benefits of working with someone on my team is that they have a lot of experience deploying use cases across many industries. And you as a software engineer or a product manager at a company probably have a really good understanding of your niche and your use case, but you probably don't have exposure to the broad variety of use cases being implemented in, like if you're in financial services, maybe someone in healthcare is doing something very interesting that has applicability to your use case. And I think that's like a huge benefit of working with our team, is just the fact that we have such broad context across these different use cases. In terms of what we do with that customer, we will help map out the best architectures, help build specific evaluations for the models. It's very difficult to measure the performance of these models when you do sophisticated tasks. And our team is somewhat of a series of experts in doing that. And then for some of our more complex customer engagements, we will actually fine tune the models. So we will, garner data from the customer and do specific post-training exercises to make the model more amenable to their task. So everything from fine tuning to prompt engineering to system architecture, just to get to the point where we have satisfied a set of business goals and they can now do something productive with the model.
I'm interested, in terms of the composition of that team. Is it mostly people who started off deeply technical, or is there also people who can speak the technical language but are coming at it more from the business side and the use case side?
It's a great question. There's a couple things to consider here. So I'd say the first thing is sort of what is the shape of someone on this team. And I think it comprises of like three main areas. One is like product intuition. So we're looking for someone who has built, products before, or has been a product manager, or just has experience with that user customer feedback loop. And not all roles in engineering get exposure to that. And I think it's a really important thing. The next is the technical depth aspect. So, we're looking for people who have proven that they can grok with technology at a very, very deep level. Because as I mentioned before, we're seen as the experts in generative AI. And even though you might be consuming generative AI through an API that's sort of an abstraction layer, generally problem solving or understanding capabilities requires peeling back a layer into the deep learning aspect, understanding tokenization, understanding some core competencies around transformer architecture. Although you're not like building these models from scratch, you really do need to understand the like core components of that. And I think that's elevated a step further for some of our fine tuning roles. So we delineate between those with product experience, like very deep product experience, and those with deeper ML experience. And then the final sort of area we look for is customer facing ability. So have you stood in front of a series of executives or a set of engineers or some group and presented something and been, capable of defending your ideas and working with those external stakeholders in a way that's collaborative and sort of evident that you will succeed in a role where you're put on the front line with customers. So between those three vectors, we typically look for someone who has good coverage. And some people, spike very deeply on product and customer facing and less so on technical. But that being said, there is sort of a minimum bar on the technical aspect that, we test for in our interview loops and is required just due to the nature of how these systems get integrated at the lowest level of the tech stack. You need to be able to understand distributed systems. You need to be able to communicate with engineers who are building very complex production systems and not feel like you're out of your depth technically. So it's definitely a consideration between all three, but there is a sort of a floor for the technical aspect.
And in terms of like hiring for that team, how do these skill sets present themselves? Is it through the interview process? Are you looking for like hard experience of, like for the technical, for instance, building, training models, things like that? Or like how do you usually evaluate those three vectors?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, the starting with customer facing, we want to see some demonstration of like having to meet some objective. If you were in sales, you had to sell. If you were a consultant, you had to manage an engagement. So there's some evidence on a resume, and then a lot of that can be assessed through an interview. We typically do sort of mock role plays with some of our sales team, and have this sort of candidate come and present their thinking on how they might tackle an account or present to a customer. And generally speaking, that one is quite evident pretty early on in an interview process. We test for technical depth by sort of presenting a generic engineering interview and then a very LLM specific interview. And we find that we are comfortable with someone who spikes on either of those. So the engineering interview is a bit more technically deep in terms of like engineering prowess. And if you do really well on that, but then really poorly on the LLM, we think you'll be able to learn the LLM fundamentals. But vice versa, there's scenarios where there are folks with no formal engineering background, but they've done a lot of work with language models. They do a lot better on that language model test. And then we can, we feel comfortable, again, at some floor level that we can nurture and help them learn the technical acumen to counteract that. So those two are quite easy to test. I think the third one that's hardest to test is the product aspect. Generally speaking, we want people to have evidence of that somehow. So again, how I mentioned, way back at the start of the conversation when I was in first year, I built that machine learning model. And if I just built that model and like left it on my computer, it would be useless. But it exists in some blog post that I wrote, and I can reference that, and that's like demonstrated. And I think the more people work on their side projects or things for their job, finding ways to capture that and demonstrate that is really important, because being able to show product intuition or product learnings is quite difficult. And I think there's a natural skepticism around someone who says, I've done so much work for this in XYZ, but they have no collateral or artifact to sort of demonstrate how that manifested or what that really was.
There's a lot of great stuff there, like in terms of building something and being able to showcase it. Is there any kind of other recruiting advice, be it resumes, networking, cover letters, all that kind of stuff, GitHub, to kind of tie it all together?
Yeah, I think one piece of advice I always give for folks is that like sales skills are really, really important. And when you join a sales organization, the first role you normally join is an SDR or a BDR. You're outreaching to the world and trying to get people's attention. And the best thing about that skill set is it's basically one-to-one aligned with the task of getting a job. So if you don't like your job as an SDR, you'll probably be able to get another job because you're training to get people's attention and therefore get interviews. One thing that I see a lot of new grads do is apply and not sort of follow up. And what I mean by that is not just like apply and then say, "Oh, I applied, I'm super excited, I'd love to chat with you." That doesn't really get people's attention. What you want to do is sort of apply to, or like be more selective in jobs you apply to. Like find a job that resonates with you and you have a reason to apply to it, that you believe, that you don't just think is like fictitious. And then when you apply, find the people on LinkedIn who are responsible or associated with that role and send them individualized outreach. And this takes so much time. Like it's a very labor intensive thing to do. But one of the most notable things I found from someone who were interviewing is they sent me a like Loom recording. So they recorded their screen, showed me like a project they built and was like, "Hey, like I want 45 seconds of your time to show you this video I made for you. I'm really interested in this." And that was like awesome. That like really grabbed my attention. And I found out they sent something completely different to another person on the team. So they had like built multiple aspects of this and really sort of thrown it out there. Because I think at the end of the day, you have to realize that like these hiring decisions are made by people. And if your request to chat or your like follow up from an application looks robotic, people are just going to treat you in a robotic way, which is like sort of assume they will talk to you if you get through the precursor interviews, but not make that extra effort. So I think like, yeah, being selective on where you apply and then really putting in the effort on outreaching to as many people as possible in novel ways is a differentiator for sure.
100%. I think that's something like I definitely try to embody is like everyone says like diversify, put your eggs in a lot of baskets. But my kind of approach is like find one precise company and then just like target it with like no remorse. So I definitely feel that. Going back towards like the conversation of AI and the future of AI, what impact do you think AI will have in the future long term?
Yeah, I think it'll be pretty profound. My caveat here is I work for Anthropic. I think it's probably a good time to caveat maybe what Anthropic is. So we've mentioned it a bunch. It's a AI research lab that focuses on AI safety. And it was a big reason of why I joined the safety mission behind Anthropic, because I have a core belief that we're on the precipice of building technology that will change the fabric of society in a very meaningful way. And I think you've seen micro examples of technology being really disruptive to society in a non sort of safe way. I think I would normally cite social media as an example for this. Tremendous good and connectivity across the world, but essentially the main optimization made in the social media revolution was monetization. And that was at the expense of like a lot of things. And I think being really calculated in the trade-offs between monetization and like distribution, but also like safety and implications for the future is really important. But I do think AI will be a part of everyone's life. I think it's going to make intelligence much cheaper. I think you'll see profound impacts to the healthcare system. Like the ability, and I don't think this is true today, so I don't go out and ask Claude or ask ChatGPT to diagnose you, but I do think there's a world where we can reliably and sort of provably identify that an AI system is capable of diagnosing and providing you healthcare advice. And I think alleviating the like burden on actual medical professionals for like triage and those types of things will be huge. And I also think you'll see it like you're already seeing its adoption at an exponential rate in software engineering. I think you're going to see that systematically across all industries. You'll start seeing its adoption in as I mentioned, like healthcare and financial services, really just behind the scenes at first, and then it'll become quite ubiquitous. I think if you look at the curve that we've been on, in 2019, GPT-2 came out, or GPT-3. And GPT-3 could like reasonably write at a competent elementary school level, I would say. GPT 3.5 came out, the first version of ChatGPT. That was a somewhat competent high schooler, I would say, like a middle of the pack high schooler. If you look at some of the benchmarks of models from today, Claude 3.5, some of the new models that we might release soon, and models released by Google and OpenAI, they're quickly performing in the top percentile of subject matter experts. They are, scoring 95% plus on the LSAT, on the SAT, on these like standardized tests that we've benchmarked human intelligence. And that's all happened in, a 5-year window.
Mhm.
So I think if you extend that over the next 5 years and you believe in exponentials, you're going to see a very rapid transformation of the general knowledge scape. So I'm very bullish, but obviously biased given my position.
It's exciting times. It's definitely what use case do you find most compelling? For me, it's the prospect of preventative healthcare, like being able to understand your body at a deep level, and like kind of the intersection, like you were talking about, of healthcare and AI.
Mhm.
What do you find most exciting about AI?
I definitely think healthcare is huge. I would say I would not put healthcare as my most exciting for one reason, that uh, when I find something most exciting, I like want to push it forwards, like accelerate it. And I think healthcare is one of those things that you just have to do right, and it doesn't matter how long it takes. You just have to do it right, because it's like such a high risk category. I think right now I'm most excited about software engineering.
Mhm.
You know, so many people in the world have really nuanced and interesting perspectives that could lend them to building, incredible products or incredible solutions to real problems that would alleviate and make people's lives better. I think if you look at like the invention of Uber, or like all these like large tech innovations that have created jobs for many, and just like created convenience and sort of changed the efficiency level of humans. All of that was gated behind someone doing years and years of engineering schooling and like understanding these systems and then being able to build them. um, I think you're going to get to the point where the main constraint for building, at the very least, prototypes, but ideally in the future production ready systems, is just your ability to articulate your solution in natural language. You like that'll become the de facto coding language, is like how well can you articulate the solution, not how skilled are you at implementing, in your given programming language. So I guess some really really exciting projects out there that are doing some fascinating stuff. So I think that's probably where I'm most excited for right now. But I agree with you, in the long term, healthcare will probably be the most impactful.
Awesome. And then I know we're running a little over time, so just the final question. As a former Western student yourself, do you have any final words for Western students listening?
Totally. I'd say like the main thing that I look at is Western is very well positioned in a sort of balance across disciplines, due to its large student base. Like there's a lot of students at Western, due to sort of the social nature of the campus and the sort of environment you're in. There is a lot of benefit and cross pollination to be had by meeting interesting people and interconnecting with those outside of your core discipline. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's like really underappreciated when you're looking for jobs or when you're trying to optimize in the short term. But in the long term, the ability to have friends from a broad walks of life, who have varied interests that are different to yours, have ideas that are opposed to yours, are really, really, really important, because those folks will go out and do things that are very different to you, and like besides just being like great people and friends to have, they will provide you perspective on life, and also like give you nuanced ability and inlets to future opportunities. So I think Western is uniquely positioned compared to lots of American schools, lots of other Canadian schools, such that there is this like amazing ability to network with so many different people. And networking doesn't need to look like, you're in a suit at an event, sort of chatting about swapping LinkedIn's.
Mm.
It frankly can be just the people you're friends with or your friends of friends. Like very quickly, you all become young professionals and you all start doing very interesting things. So I would just say like really optimize for meeting many people and being super open-minded to those you're meeting and not trying to silo the group of people you know as just sort of those who think and want to do similar things to yourself.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Garvan. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of inspired Western students going forward. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Really appreciate it, Owen.
This podcast is a Western AI production, hosted and developed by Owen Osler, produced by Maria Doyle, sound engineering by Calvin Howe. Thanks for listening.